The conference room door clicked shut behind me with the finality of a coffin lid. I stood there for 3 heartbeats, my hand still resting on the polished chrome handle, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that sterile office glow that made even victories feel hollow. My promotion interview, scheduled for 2:30 p.m. this Tuesday, had been obliterated with a casual wave of Vincent Hawthorne's manicured hand. I pressed my palms against the cool glass wall separating the conference room from the bustling floor of Bolt Enterprises. Through the transparent barrier, I watched my colleagues hunched over their keyboards, oblivious to the earthquake that had just reshaped my world. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 3 years, I'd built my reputation on being Maya Johanson, methodical, thorough, the woman who dotted every I and crossed every T. The one who arrived early and left late, who turned chaos into order with spreadsheets and color-coded project timelines. Someone more impressive came along, Vincent had said, his voice carrying that particular brand of smugness reserved for men who'd never questioned their right to occupy corner offices. "This is why you'll never sit at my table." The words echoed now as I walked the familiar path back to my cramped cubicle, past the water cooler where rumors bred like bacteria, past the break room where middle managers gossiped over stale coffee. I kept my expression neutral, professional. A skill I'd perfected during years of swallowing frustrations and filing away grievances. But silence, I'd learned, wasn't surrender. It was reconnaissance. Wednesday morning. I arrived at Bolt Enterprises 47 minutes before my official start time, the building still drowsy in the pre-dawn quiet. The parking garage echoed with my footsteps as I made my way to the elevator, clutching my travel mug filled with dark roast that would fuel the next phase of my career, though not in the way Vincent expected. My workspace occupied a corner of the 3rd floor, strategically positioned with clear sightlines to Vincent's glass-walled office. Over the months, I'd developed an acute awareness of his patterns, the way he rolled in at 9:15 with his protein smoothie, how he spent his first hour scrolling through his phone while pretending to review reports, the predictable lunch meetings where he schmoozed potential clients with company funds. I opened my laptop and began what I privately called digital archaeology. The beauty of working at a tech-forward company like Bolt Enterprises was the paper trail. Everything lived in the cloud: emails, calendar invites, project files, budget approvals. 3 years of meticulous record-keeping had taught me to save everything, to screenshot the important bits, to create backup folders that even IT couldn't easily trace. I started with the Morrison account, a 6-figure contract I'd secured last spring after weeks of late-night strategy sessions and client dinners that left my feet aching. The original email chain showed my outreach, my research, my carefully crafted proposals. But the final presentation deck bore Vincent's name as lead strategist, with my contributions buried in the acknowledgements like a footnote. Screenshot. Save. File under Morrison credit. Next, the quarterly budget allocations. I pulled up Vincent's expense reports from the past 18 months, cross-referencing them against project outcomes. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in chemicals: restaurant bills for client meetings that coincided with his daughter's soccer tournaments, conference registrations for events he never attended, consulting fees paid to companies that existed only on paper. My fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, copying transaction IDs, downloading PDF receipts, organizing everything into a folder structure that would make a librarian weep with joy. Each file name followed a pattern: date, transaction type, anomaly category. No emotion, no editorial commentary. Just facts, lined up like dominoes waiting for someone to push the first one. The morning dissolved around me as I worked, the office gradually filling with the symphony of startup sounds, coffee machines gurgling to life, keyboards clicking in staccato rhythms, the distant hum of conversations about weekend plans and project deadlines. I moved through it all like a ghost, invisible in my dedication to this new project that would define both our futures. Thursday, 11:47 a.m. Maya. Vincent's voice cut through my concentration like a blade. I looked up from my screen to find him looming over my cubicle, his jaw tight with barely contained irritation. Conference room. Now. I followed him through the maze of workstations, noting the subtle way conversations paused as we passed. Office gossip traveled faster than official memos, and word of my cancelled interview had already begun its viral spread through the Bolt Enterprises ecosystem. Vincent closed the conference room door with unnecessary force. HR wants to schedule a follow-up meeting about departmental processes, he said, his tone suggesting this development ranked somewhere between a root canal and an IRS audit on his preference scale. They mentioned your name specifically. I tilted my head slightly, the picture of professional curiosity. Oh? In what context? Something about compliance and documentation standards. His fingers drummed against the table's surface, a nervous tic I'd noticed during particularly stressful client presentations. Did you say something to them about how we handle projects? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and deliberate. I let it linger for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to suggest consideration, short enough to avoid suspicion. I submitted a routine process improvement suggestion on Monday, I said, my voice carrying the same measured tone I used for quarterly reviews. Just some observations about documentation consistency across departments. Standard stuff. Vincent's eyes narrowed, searching my face for tells I'd learned to suppress years ago. What kind of observations? Nothing dramatic. Email thread organization, project attribution protocols, expense reporting workflows. I shrugged with practiced nonchalance. You know how I am about keeping things tidy. He studied me for another moment, clearly wanting to probe deeper but lacking any concrete reason to do so. Vincent Hawthorne might have been politically savvy, but he'd never learned to read the subtleties of patience. He operated in bold strokes and immediate gratifications, leaving him blind to the quiet revolution brewing 3 cubicles away from his corner office. Right, he said finally. Well, keep me informed if they ask you anything specific about our team's operations. Of course, I replied, already knowing that ship had sailed toward a horizon he couldn't yet see. Friday evening. The Bolt Enterprises building emptied like a punctured balloon every Friday at 5 p.m., leaving behind only the dedicated few and the desperately behind. I fell into neither category that evening, but I remained at my desk nonetheless, ostensibly reviewing client proposals while actually monitoring the digital tremors my Monday submission had triggered. My phone buzzed with a text from my college roommate Alex, drinks at Murphy's? Need to hear how the interview went. I stared at the message for several seconds, considering how to respond. The interview that never happened felt like a wound I wasn't ready to expose to fresh air, even with someone who'd known me since freshman statistics classes and late-night pizza binges. Instead, I typed back, rain check? Drowning in a project deadline. The response came immediately, workaholic. You're going to burn out if you don't take breaks. If only she knew that work had become my salvation rather than my burden. Every late evening, every weekend spent cross-referencing expense reports and timeline discrepancies, every moment invested in building my case, it all felt like meditation, like prayer, like preparation for a battle that would be won through preparation rather than passion. I returned to my screen, where a new email had materialized in my inbox like a gift from the corporate gods. Subject line, Process Improvement Initiative additional documentation requested. Helen Wong from HR, efficient, thorough Helen who wore sensible shoes and asked uncomfortable questions with a smile, had attached a formal request for supporting materials related to my Monday submission. The language was carefully neutral, but I could read between the lines. My breadcrumb trail had been followed, and someone was hungry for more substantial evidence. I opened a new document and began typing my response, each word chosen with the precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. I would provide exactly what they'd requested, nothing more, nothing less. No editorial commentary, no inflammatory accusations. Just data points and documentation, arranged with the same methodical care I'd brought to every project Vincent had eventually claimed as his own. By the time I finished, the building had grown quiet around me, the only sounds the whispered conversations of the cleaning crew and the steady hum of servers in the IT department. Through the window, I could see the city lights beginning to twinkle like scattered diamonds against the darkening sky. Manhattan at night always felt like a promise, opportunities waiting to be seized, deals waiting to be struck, empires waiting to be built or destroyed. I saved my work, backed it up to 3 separate cloud drives, and encrypted the most sensitive files with passwords that would take supercomputers decades to crack. Then I allowed myself a small smile, not the professional mask I wore during client meetings, but something genuine and sharp and satisfied. Vincent had taught me many things during our 3 years together, though probably not the lessons he'd intended. He'd shown me how power could corrupt judgment, how arrogance could blind people to obvious vulnerabilities, how the very traits that made someone successful in the short term could destroy them in the long term. Most importantly, he'd demonstrated that in the corporate world, patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon. Monday, 9:23 a.m. Vincent burst through my cubicle entrance like a man fleeing a crime scene, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled around the edges. His tie sat askew, his hair showed finger tracks from anxious running, and his eyes carried the wild look of someone who'd spent the weekend discovering that his carefully constructed world had fault lines. "Why did HR recommend you anyway?" he demanded, his voice pitched just below shouting but carrying enough venom to poison a well. I looked up from my keyboard with the same calm expression I'd perfected over years of weathering his mood swings and credit theft. Around us, the morning's productivity ground to a halt as curious faces turned toward the brewing confrontation. I shrugged, a gesture that conveyed nothing and everything simultaneously. But inside, where Vincent couldn't see, I smiled the kind of smile that could power a small city. Because what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend in his current state of panic, was that I'd been laying groundwork for this moment since my first week at Bolt Enterprises. Every stolen idea had been documented. Every misappropriated budget line had been photographed. Every instance of his signature on my work had been preserved in digital amber, waiting for exactly this moment when his kingdom would begin its inevitable collapse. The beauty of it lay in the simplicity. I hadn't needed to fabricate evidence or manufacture scandals. Vincent had provided all the ammunition himself, scattered across 3 years of careless competence and casual theft. I'd simply been patient enough to collect it all, organize it with the same attention to detail that had made me invaluable to every team I'd ever joined. My routine process improvement suggestion had been anything but routine. Buried within its bureaucratic language and corporate formatting had been a careful selection of anomalies, expense reports that raised eyebrows, project timelines that told contradictory stories, email chains that revealed the gap between effort and credit. Not accusations. Never accusations. Just questions. Questions that led to more questions, that opened doors to investigations, that transformed breadcrumbs into banquets for hungry auditors. Tuesday, 2:17 p.m. The quarterly leadership review arrived like a reckoning, drawing department heads and senior executives into the largest conference room Bolt Enterprises possessed. I found myself seated at the polished mahogany table, not as a supplicant or observer, but as a key stakeholder in what Helen from HR had diplomatically termed process clarification discussions. Vincent sat across from me, his face a mask of forced composure that couldn't quite hide the tremors of impending catastrophe. CEO Patricia Caldwell occupied the head position, her silver hair gleaming under the conference room's LED strips, her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless corporate careers. Helen cleared her throat and opened her tablet, the gesture carrying the formality of a judge preparing to read a verdict. Following our routine compliance review, we've identified several areas requiring immediate attention within the Strategic Development Department. What followed was a masterpiece of corporate archaeology. Email threads appeared on the projection screen, showing the evolution of ideas from my drafts to Vincent's final presentations. Calendar invites revealed meeting schedules that contradicted official project narratives. Expense reports lined up like evidence in a fraud trial, each charge more questionable than the last. I watched Vincent's carefully constructed reputation disintegrate in real time, slide by methodical slide. His trademark confidence evaporated like morning mist, replaced by the darting eyes and shallow breathing of a man watching his empire crumble under the weight of his own choices. The conference room maintained funeral silence as Helen methodically presented 3 years of accumulated evidence. No one interrupted, no one asked questions. The data spoke with a voice that needed no interpretation, telling a story of systemic credit theft, questionable expense practices, and the kind of ethical blindness that destroyed companies from within. "Maya," Patricia said finally, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel through silk. "You've been with strategic development for 3 years. How would you assess the current state of departmental operations?" I looked across the table at Vincent, noting the way his hands trembled against the mahogany surface, the sweat that beaded along his hairline despite the conference room's aggressive air conditioning. Then I turned back to Patricia, my voice steady and professional. "I believe we have significant opportunities for improvement," I said. "Particularly in the areas of project attribution, budget oversight, and internal communication protocols." Patricia nodded slowly, her expression suggesting she'd heard exactly what she'd expected to hear. "And if asked to lead those improvements, would you feel prepared to take on that responsibility?" The question hung in the air like a butterfly waiting to be caught. Around the table, I could feel the shift in dynamics, the subtle reorientation of power that happened when organizations realized they'd been backing the wrong horse. Yes, I said simply. I believe I would. Vincent made a small sound, half protest, half whimper, but no one acknowledged it. His relevance to this conversation had ended the moment Helen's presentation began. Wednesday, 4:45 p.m. I stood in what had been Vincent's corner office just 24 hours earlier, watching the facilities team remove the last traces of his occupancy. The leather chair that had symbolized his authority now sat empty in the hallway, waiting for donation pickup along with the motivational posters that had apparently failed to motivate their owner toward ethical behavior. His personal effects, family photos, golf trophies, the crystal paperweight from his Harvard Business School reunion, had been packed into bankers' boxes and delivered to the security desk for pickup. The transformation had happened with corporate efficiency that bordered on brutal. Vincent's termination, effective immediately, processed through HR with the clinical precision of a surgical procedure. My promotion, contingent on a 90-day performance review that felt more like a formality than a genuine evaluation. The Strategic Development Department, placed under new leadership with a mandate for transparency and accountability that would reshape how Bolt Enterprises operated at every level. I settled into the chair that had once been his throne, testing its adjustment mechanisms and sight lines to the main floor. The ergonomics were perfect. Vincent had spared no expense in making himself comfortable. From this vantage point, I could see everything: the cubicles where junior staff worked on projects they'd actually authored, the conference rooms where honest conversations would replace theatrical presentations, the break room where gossip would soon shift from speculation about my capabilities to admiration for my methods. The office itself would need redecorating. Vincent's taste had run toward masculine intimidation, dark wood, leather, abstract art that looked expensive but said nothing. I envisioned something different: natural light, plants that would thrive in the southern exposure, bookshelves filled with industry publications and leadership theory rather than golf magazines and networking guides. A space that invited collaboration rather than demanded deference. My laptop chimed with a new message from Patricia. Maya, excellent work on the transition planning documents. Looking forward to seeing your department restructure proposal by Friday. Also, legal would like to schedule a brief consultation regarding the Vincent situation, purely precautionary, but they want to ensure we've covered all bases. I typed back a brief acknowledgement, then leaned back in my new chair to absorb the weight of what had transpired. Victory, I'd discovered, tasted different than I'd expected. Not sweet, not bitter, but something more complex, like good coffee or aged wine, with layers that revealed themselves slowly. There was satisfaction, yes, but also a strange emptiness, as if the completion of my long campaign had left a void where my righteous anger used to burn. The irony wasn't lost on me. Vincent had been right about one thing: my caution would never have gotten me to his table. But it had gotten me something better. It had gotten me to the head of my own table, in my own office, with my own team to build and my own legacy to create. Through the glass walls, I watched the end-of-day exodus begin, colleagues packing up laptops and making plans for evening activities that wouldn't include me. Not yet, anyway. I still had work to do, systems to rebuild, trust to earn through actions rather than rhetoric. The Strategic Development Department needed more than just new leadership, it needed a complete cultural overhaul, a transformation from Vincent's kingdom of credit theft and expense fraud into something worthy of the talented people who'd been working under his shadow. My laptop screen displayed the first draft of my restructuring proposal, 47 pages of systematic change designed to prevent another Vincent from ever taking root in this organization. New attribution protocols, transparent expense tracking, peer review systems for major projects, mentorship programs that actually developed talent instead of exploiting it. The document represented not just my vision for the department, but my manifesto for the kind of leader I intended to become. For the first time in 3 years, I felt the particular satisfaction that came from knowing that every hour invested, every late night spent documenting indignities, every moment of swallowed pride had been worth it. The pearls at my throat no longer felt cold, they felt warm, like my grandmother's hand on my shoulder, like approval from beyond the grave. Revenge, as it turned out, was indeed best kept clean. And patience, I'd learned, was not a weakness but a weapon, sharp, precise, and devastatingly effective in the right hands. I opened my laptop and began typing the first draft of my restructure proposal, ready to build something better from the ruins of what came before. The city lights twinkled beyond my window like stars, like possibilities, Like promises of the empire, I would build on the foundation of truth rather than theft.